Indiana Jones is a film franchise pretty special to me. I experienced the initial trilogy as a young boy and thought each film to be extremely entertaining and of very high quality. As such, I was of course super excited for the fourth entry in the series back in 2008, when Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was getting ready to come out. I was a teenager back then and couldn't believe I would be lucky enough to sit down in a theater and watch a new Indiana Jones movie in my lifetime. But when the movie came out, I remember leaving the theater in a state of disbelief. I actually lied to myself for a couple of years, thinking in my head over and over again that the movie was pretty good. I kept the idea in my mind that it was an Indiana Jones movie, and that it's impossible for an Indiana Jones movie to suck. Until eventually, I buckled and accepted the fact that the newest indie film was extremely disappointing to me. Something I'd always felt but repressed for quite a while. Anytime that someone would bring up the movie in passing, it was pretty much a collective laugh at how terrible it had turned out, and how wrong we were for wanting to see another Indiana Jones movie starring old man Harrison Ford. That was almost 10 years ago. It seems like yesterday. Time sure does fly, and opinions sure do change, especially within film. Recently I had a buddy of mine lend me his copy of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He picked up all the Indiana Jones movies and decided to marathon them, and had some interesting things to say about the most recent entry. Like myself, he'd only seen the fourth movie the one time in the theater, and had the same feelings I did about it. I think it's safe to say a lot of people feel this way about Indy 4. Oddly enough though, he lent me the movie saying it really surprised him how much better it was than the first time he experienced the movie. Hearing this was kind of interesting to me. If you've been watching my channel for a little while now, you'll know that I did a video on the Lost World Jurassic Park for its 20th anniversary and talked about the majorly different experience my dad had after watching the movie first in 1997, hating it, and later in 2015, absolutely loving it from start to finish. I wondered if the same thing would happen to me with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. After rewatching the movie, I'm honestly shocked at what I saw. Now don't get it twisted, the first three Indiana Jones movies I like more. They're my top 10 favorite films of all time, and I could watch any of those movies any day of the week. But I gotta be honest, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is not a bad movie. In fact, if I'm being completely transparent here, I have to say that it's actually a pretty damn fun time. And I can't believe I'm saying that, and I couldn't believe how entertained I was watching this movie 10 years later, and how effective the filmmaking and cinematography were for capturing an Indiana Jones movie set in the 1950s. I realize why many watching this movie, myself included, had such a backlash against it back then, but I can't honestly go over this movie in depth lying about its quality. It's just different. It's no longer set in the 1930s because Indiana Jones is 20 years older now, meaning there are no Nazis, there's a lot of communism baddies running around, and even some extraterrestrial stuff as the basis for the story. I quickly realized on my second viewing that the first half of Kingdom was actually more of an X-Files episode featuring Indiana Jones than I may have remembered. I think this threw a lot of people for a loop back in 2008, but watching it here, now in the present, it feels great to me. In fact, I'll go ahead and say I prefer the first half over the second half of the movie. Quickly jumping into some negatives or things the film does wrong, I have to address the presence of CGI in a movie with a character that existed before the special effects age of post-Jurassic Park Hollywood. This movie has a lot of pretty poor CGI, and I'm not really sure why. Whether it be gophers, monkeys, or refrigerators, the movie has a ton of computer animation that just doesn't look convincing. There are a handful of moments that actually take you out of the film, specifically the monkey vine swinging scene and the Marion Ravenwood driving a truck off a cliff and landing on a tree scene. Well, those are pretty weird, and I couldn't bash the movie for them too much because the original Indiana Jones movies have off-the-wall stuff like that as well. The one that immediately comes to mind is the scene in Temple of Doom where Indy and his pals fall out of an airplane in a raft that starts inflating while it's falling through the sky, hits the ground, and falls off of a waterfall, completely intact with no one falling out or getting broken bones or killed after all of that is said and done. It's just like raptor gymnastics. It's a what the fuck moment. But it doesn't mean it destroys the entire film. In fact, I think it's high time I talked about why this movie works so well for me. Coming into Kingdom of the Crystal Skull not knowing what to expect after 10 years may have been the biggest blessing this film could have gotten from me. I was absolutely amazed at how good this movie looks and how excellent the cinematography is here on display. The acting is top-notch from almost everybody, and Indiana Jones feels like he should. That moment where he picks his hat up off the ground and we see Indy's shadow set down on his head is absolutely amazing. It dawned on me then that we're talking about a movie directed by Steven Spielberg here. Steven fucking Spielberg, for crying out loud. Indiana looking for the magnetized alien case in Area 51 with gunpowder and a Soviet Union soldier's hat is great writing, and watching his eventual escape after destroying several crates in the area is really cool, especially after seeing the Ark of the Covenant lying dormant within the warehouse. The movie has so much going for it and so much to say and do to catch up the audience in the 20 years since we last saw Indy that I think it really doesn't get enough credit where credit is due in this department. Secondly, I have to admit, I liked Shia LaBeouf in this movie. I hated him the last time I saw it. And here, I'm aware that he's giving an extremely good performance and it is really interesting to watch. The back and forth with Indy and Mutt up until the two find out they're related is great. Unfortunately, it didn't last the whole runtime. Some of Crystal Skull gets a little too insane towards the end of the movie. We jump forward to so many different set pieces and meet so many different villains again and again in the final stretch that it kind of outstayed its welcome for me when all was said and done, whether it be the interdimensional being's Mayan ship or Indy and Marion's wedding. This, coupled with the cheesy monkey and truck jumping off a cliff scenes, really tarnishes an otherwise excellent movie's reputation. When Indy and Mutt find out their father and son, we don't really do anything with it. A couple of lines are thrown in there, but nothing really resonates. I just wish we could have gotten a little more meat to that section of the story. Finally, I have to talk about the man himself in the movie. Indiana Jones is awesome. It's so great to see him out there kicking ass again, and rewatching this has me super excited for the 5th film due out in 2021. I'm not joking here, I really enjoyed Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think it's the least appealing of the 4 movies we've seen so far, but I still think it's honestly a good movie. Again, I think this is an example of a film that audiences were ridiculously hyped up for, and unfortunately, their expectations weren't met because it was nothing like what they expected. Spielberg and Ford have stated several times they turned down this 4th movie for years because of the alien subplots within it, George Lucas being the man that kept trying to champion the idea into the final film. It didn't really surprise any of them when the movie had such a backlash after we all knew about the alien stuff. After 9 years, almost 10, and my unhyped mind settling down though, I came out of Indy 4 very, very satisfied. I don't usually grade movies in a special video like this, but if I had to, I'd give Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull a 7.5 out of 10, 4 stars out of 5, and a B. My final thoughts that I want to throw out there are, sometimes this movie felt a little too easy for Jones, and he was kind of never in any serious danger, which bothers me a bit. The only scene where Indiana gets his ass kicked is during the fight amongst the giant ants, and I felt that at that point in the movie it felt the most like a classic Indy film. My point being, Indy needs to get roughed up a bit more in the new film. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, he was shot, beaten senseless, strangled, thrown off of cars and into snake pits, and even tied to a stake around bloodthirsty ghosts. Temple of Doom had him possessed by a cult leader and tortured with a voodoo doll while the threat of his heart being ripped out was present towards the end, and even drinks poison at the beginning of the movie. Last Crusade had Indy hanging off of a tank and getting smacked with a shovel, tied up to a chair in a burning room, and forced to take on paranormal trials in an effort to save his father who was dying of a gunshot wound every second along the way. In Crystal Skull, he just fights a Russian in a circle of ants. And that's my final critique of the movie in an effort to suggest a different take on the 5th movie. I like all 4 Indiana Jones movies now, and it feels pretty damn good to say that, to be honest. So what do you guys think about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Have you seen it since your first viewing, and what do you think about the reaction it got after its initial release? I honestly think you should give this movie a second chance. I wouldn't have done it if it hadn't been suggested to me, and I'm pretty happy that I did. Like I said, it's not the best in the series, but for what it is, it's a good time. As always, guys, thank you, and take it easy.